What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the channel. Me llamo Tapiwa, aka Rude Boy Gaming Studios. And again, like I said, welcome back to the channel. Murise. Hope everyone's doing good. Today we're going to have a little discussion about one of the games that I hold near and dear to my heart. A game franchise which, quite frankly, shot up my favorites list after 2020. And I think I may have mentioned it in previous commentary videos that my favorite games growing up was Soul Calibur back on the PlayStation 1. Jak and Daxter on the PlayStation 2, God of War franchise on the PlayStation 2 and onwards, and also an honorable shout out to Ratchet and Clank, that was also PlayStation 2 and upwards. But slowly but surely, two entries that came in 2020 challenged that list, and one of them happened to be Ghost of Tsushima, and the other one was The Last of Us Part 2, which is what we're here to discuss today. And as always, let me know in the comments below your favorite games, you know, whether it's the PlayStation 1 era, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, 4, 5, whatever, Xbox games, if you're an Xbox gamer, or PC, you know, whichever way. But anyways, let's start the video and have this little discussion regarding The Last of Us Part 2. So at the climax of The Last of Us, a blockbuster 2013 video game that is about zombie-fungus apocalypse, but is really about the lengths a parent will go to protect a child. You're forced to kill a doctor. This doctor is not a threat. He stands there holding a scalpel, so technically he's unarmed with only the nurses around him. But you've got a gun, and the gameplay has made it clear throughout the game, after hours and hours of close fighting, that your character could subdue the man peacefully if you wanted, or you could do it violently. But most players, including myself, chose to kill him and his nurses in a brutal manner in order to save, you know, our baby girl, Ellie. And video games are constructed around choice. A lot of games, including highly ambitious ones, present you at various points with, you know, kill the guy, don't kill the guy binary, allowing you to shape at least part of your destiny and part of the character's morality or the eventual outcomes of the story. And at this juncture in The Last of Us, there was nothing but a glaring lack of alternatives. The only way to move the story forward and reach the supposed ending, in which we'd already invested, 14 plus emotional hours into the game, was to murder the pleading doctor and his nurses and rescue Ellie. And this sequence helped establish The Last of Us as one of the most successful games in the medium's history, a high watermark of both artistic achievement and commercial viability. The title in the end sold more than 17 million copies and counting, and won numerous Game of the Year awards. And now, after the success of The Last of Us Part 2, there's an HBO series being developed about it. Now, for Naughty Dog, the Sony-owned studio behind the series, the safe thing to do from a financial standpoint would have been to continue the first game's story in a predictable way that kept the fans happy, as the makers of Marvel and Star Wars movies have done so boringly but profitably. And you know myself, I always criticize Marvel movies a lot because they've just become so repetitive and, focused on the one track, but they make millions and millions of dollars. So, Marvel has no reason to sort of sway from the path. But The Last of Us Part 2 does nothing of the sort. Instead, the punishingly bleak sequel kills off the original's main character, which is Joel, and turns the secondary hero into a villain. It takes violence to a level that is uncomfortable even by standards of video games, and seemingly does everything in its power to make gamers feel bad about the act of playing it. It makes us genuinely evaluate the cycle of violence and force us to face the consequences of our actions in the first game from the other lens, and by judging by how some gamers reacted to the game, we can sort of tell that we have a long way to go as a society, because people couldn't even be mature and comfortable enough with such a direction in a video game. There had to be outrage. But again, risky creative decisions like these are part of how Naughty Dog has established itself as gaming's preeminent producer of cinematic, story-based titles. And this commitment to Hollywood-grade linear narratives sets the company apart in an industry that is otherwise trending toward games based on repetitive online competition, such as Fortnite, Call of Duty, you name it. Or endless explorable open world sandboxes like the Grand Theft Auto franchise, what they've become, and pick your poison from Ubisoft's titles. But yeah, The approach entails certain pressures and risks. See, while its games are in development, Naughty Dog tries to erect a wall of secrecy around the plots, holding reviewers to tight, non-disclosure agreements, and even deceiving fans with misdirection until everything is revealed through a clean and choreographed lens. The game's story is about entrenched tribalism in a world undone by a global pandemic. As you play the game, walking through the empty spaces, scavenging for items that used to be common, listening to characters describe the fall of a society with a sense of loss, you feel emotionally in sync with this world. Even if you don't play the title, you'll probably start to hear about it. Craig Mazin, for example, the creator of the 2019 miniseries Chernobyl, as I may correct myself, had the pick of projects to pursue after the series won 10 Emmys. He decided to develop The Last of Us 2 for the HBO, largely because of the poignant brutality of its ending. And he himself is quoted to have said, "I've never experienced anything that viscerally made me question the value of love. There are endings where you think, well, that's perfect, and that's that. And then there are endings that make you start to think about your relationship with the character, really. Your relationship with narrative itself." The Last of Us and its sequel belong to a gaming genre known as survival horror. You spend a lot of time sneaking through dark rooms while enemies lurk in shadows and suspenseful music thumps in your ears. Assailants pop out from the corners, zombies tear at faces and rip out necks. The action is startling and stressful, flushing the body with adrenaline to a degree that you feel like you're living inside an alien movie. Now, the premise of the first game is that in September 2013, a strain of the cordyceps fungus, a real-life organism that can take over the bodies and minds of ants, jumps to humans. People who get infected are disfigured and hungry for flesh. Billions die and society crumbles. Many of the game's missions are built around a search for some suddenly precious items, whether it's a gallon of gas, medical kits. Bullets are scanty, and your character is usually outnumbered in battle as you expend a lot of effort sneaking up on enemies and conserving resources with stabbing enemies from behind, the famous little shiv. And then video games operate through what people in the industry call mechanics. These actions allow a player to navigate the world and give a game its logic and structure. Shooting enemies, sneaking past guards, crafting Molotov cocktails, searching for items to level up. These are all the mechanics, and they work by creating an emotional response similar to the dopamine rush of social media that compels people to spend hours immersed in a digital realm. For the most part, it's a cheap sensation, guided by stress and the meaningless accrual of points. In the best games, however, the ones that get talked about as art, mechanics enhance the story and deepen the emotional pull. With The Last of Us games, that's exactly what happens. The studio gets past this critique by making violence seem logical. Playing them, you don't question why the characters kill so often, because the post-apocalyptic setting is a place where people literally eat each other to survive. So after Abby and her friends murder Joel, Ellie and her partner Dina and her friend Jesse and Joel's brother Tommy head to the zombie-infested ruins of Seattle to get revenge on Abby and her friends. Ellie calls it justice, but we know from the start that it's really just revenge. After a number of increasingly violent and grim scenes that sees the player as Ellie kill off Abby's friends one by one without successfully finding Abby, culminating in Ellie murdering Abby's pregnant friend Mel. Ellie and her colleagues finally call off the search, only to be confronted by Abby herself, who points a gun at Ellie's head after shooting Jesse. The stories of Ellie and Abby become paralleled and intertwined. Abby treks across the country with her friends to hunt down and murder Joel because he killed her father. Ellie also, similarly treks across the country with her friends to hunt down and murder Abby because Abby killed her father figure. And perhaps the greatest achievement that The Last of Us 2 managed to get was that it successfully gives the player the time and the opportunity to get to know the stories and the motivations of each of the protagonists, as well as each of the friends who end up as collateral in their destruction. By the time Abby's extensive sequence converges with Ellie's timeline, there's absolutely no possibility of an outcome that the player will consider good between these two women. This long 25-hour multi-sided slog between two women's search for revenge, in which each of them lose everything and gain absolutely nothing, is grim and exhausting, but is also profoundly affecting in its well-trodden themes, because by the end we know these characters and we really can't say one is any more or less justified in their actions. Numerous critiques have dismissed Last of Us 2 as yet another game where the player is forced to do bad things and then told to feel bad. But this misses the point and misunderstands that the player character contract that Naughty Dog is asking you to sign up to, which is it uses so effectively to make us care for all these characters. The player is simply along for the ride in the story of characters making bad, understandable, and also good decisions occasionally, and then living with the consequences. And why this is so beautiful is because this is not purely an aesthetic exercise. This means the world building is the same as franchise building in this case. And since so many of these franchises involve killing things, what sets Naughty Dog apart? The reason it can spend years creating and enveloping narratives that adapt so well to TV is that the stories are regarded as the thinking person's core. In the first installment, you play as Joel, a hardened smuggler whose daughter died in the fungus outbreak, which we play through at the very beginning, when Sarah dies. His task is to ferry across the country the 14-year-old girl, Ellie, which we just mentioned, who is immune to the pathogen and holds the key to a vaccine. What makes Joel different and The Last of Us popular is the relationship he builds with Ellie. In between the splatter and all the gore is genuinely an affecting story of a closed-off man who allows the void of his daughter's death to be filled, such that when you kill people as Joel, you don't feel like a psychopath, you feel more like a protective dad. Now, The Last of Us Part 2 is about hate, using stories of revenge as an extended metaphor about cycles of violence. The game does this through a novel device that Naughty Dog took extreme pains to keep quiet, prohibiting journalists from mentioning it in advanced reviews after those April hackers revealed. You play the game as a pair of mortal enemies, switching sides and perspectives. The sequel begins with a paramilitary named Abby killing Joel with a golf club, and at that time her reasons aren't made clear, and Abby violently murders Joel in front of Ellie. It's a shocking and confronting scene, in part because the player is so familiar with and has Joel for most of the previous game, and in part because you, the player, were responsible for directing Abby towards this goal without us knowing what we were leading her towards. It feels like a betrayal, an abuse of the player's trust, but its effect is to make sure the player knows right from the start that this isn't their story, it's the character's story. You're just along for the ride. Here, you're not even a single actor anymore, but more akin to the camera person observing the story unfold from the numerous perspectives, with no say over where it's going to go. And this prompts Ellie to find Abby and avenge Joel's death. And the backdrop to this game is a long conflict between two tribes that war over land and have recently seen a ceasefire agreement break down. Each side blames the other for firing the first shot. So in The Last of Us Part 2, players switch between Ellie and Abby and discover that the latter has sound reasons for revenge. And as the game progresses, the appeals to sympathy are steadily amped up, introducing you to Abby's friends and family, using conversations and extended flashbacks to plunge us deep inside their stories. One of the more cruel twists of Viewpoint is a sequence in which we stab a vicious dog, and at that time you soon find yourself playing fetch with the dog as Abby, and we go on to learn that this dog is Alice. Now, while the first game uses carnage to strengthen your character's relationship with a digital teenager, The Last of Us Part 2 stuffs you with pain and guilt, making you commit heinous acts as one person, then experience the repercussions as another person. And this is made even more exhausting by a battery of digital tricks that make you feel absolutely horrible about what you're doing, from the sound of blood leaving the body of characters and the characters who grunt no just before you do what they're begging you not to do. The violence is detailed and graphic. Even the normality, anonymous hordes that you destroy between plot points are made to feel semi-human by Naughty Dog's intrinsic and insistence on giving every single one of them a name, so that whenever you down an enemy, Others cry out to them individually as they realize a friend is gone. They indirectly manage to humanize a lot of NPCs, kind of like what Red Dead Redemption 2 was able to do, albeit in a different manner. Now, the beauty of it all in its best moments, The Last of Us Part 2 is a feat of empathetic storytelling. Over the course of the narrative, I really did go from hating Abby's character to understanding her motivations and eventually flat out rooting for her. But by forcing you to act out both characters' atrocities and reconcile with all the death you've inflicted between the battles, The Last of Us Part 2 has players explore post-apocalyptic settings, collecting weapons and supplies, and it's during these breaks in action, which can last an hour or more depending on how much exploring you do, when The Last of Us Part 2 feels most like the coronavirus's twisted cousin. As the music chilled out and the battle noise quieted, I found myself wandering around the desolate streets, admiring photorealistic scenes of nature reclaiming Seattle's landscapes. Now, in these Seattle landscapes, there are boarded restaurants and empty conference rooms. Characters routinely remark of the world as it used to be. In one scene, a character asks another what the vast halls of an aquarium must have felt like, packed with kids. In another scene, Ellie and her friend walk through the remnants of a comic book convention. Not all of this is sad. One of the game's sweeter scenes is a moment where Ellie plays Dina a song with the guitar she finds in an abandoned music store. The guitar that Joel taught her to play. And Naughty Dog revealed Ellie's sexuality in 2014 in a DLC called Left Behind. Social media bottom dwellers protested in the usual manner of bombarding the creators of the game and its fans with bigotry and making YouTube videos accusing Naughty Dog of, the usual social justice warrior agendas. And hundreds of independent titles explore the themes of sexuality and gender identity, but Ellie stands out because she's a protagonist of an aggressive, big-budget game aimed at the medium's core male audience. Now, it would be very easy to interpret the story of The Last of Us 2 as a simple precautionary tale about the consequences of revenge and the toll it takes on the body and soul, but you'd be doing yourself a disservice and the writers of Naughty Dog a disservice as well to leave it at just that. Yes, Joel's death serves as the catalyst to Ellie's need for revenge, but it also serves the double purpose of antagonizing Abby. To the player, though many gamers were unhappy about the suddenness of Joel's death at the hands of the character, which at that point we had no idea about, and when I experienced this incredibly gut-wrenching scene myself, I was fully on board with Ellie's quest for revenge. While Ellie and Dina were adventuring through the forests of Seattle and embarking on their journey to avenge Joel's death, I felt like I would have gone to the ends of the earth with them to settle this score in Seattle. But as the hunt for Abby continued and we started to see how unstable Ellie's decision-making was becoming, by taking Joel's revolver and going down the hateful path, I think that Ellie truly believes that she's honoring the memory of Joel by tracking down Abby. And we see this as well in which she points out the interrogation styles that we saw in the first game when she notices the remnants of the people that Tommy's interrogated. And only here, without Joel's resolve and vigor, it ends in the tragically avoidable deaths of Owen and pregnant Mel. And though Ellie temporarily abandons her quest for vengeance after this incident, when Abby discovers these bodies, Ellie's actions only serve to rekindle the destructive cycle of violence. And Abby, freshly fueled by the deaths of her friends, comes back after Ellie. And when Abby eventually finds Ellie, Jesse, Tommy, and Dina, it is here, while Abby's pointing a gun at defenseless Ellie, that Naughty Dog makes perhaps the boldest narrative decision. By rewinding the clock back 3 days and asking us to experience the same 3-day story from Abby's perspective. And this is where a lot of people just lost it. Naughty Dog had just spent the last 12 hours guaranteeing our hatred for Abby, and they have the balls to ask us to play as her. At least that's what everyone initially thought in this moment. And personally as well, I didn't expect Naughty Dog would be able to slowly start chipping away at my hatred for Abby as they began to build her character, sow the seeds of redemption, and reveal her in a sort of parallel universe as Ellie. And ultimately, it takes two runaway Seraphites, which we meet on the path, Lev and Yara, whom Abby takes into her care to start molding her into a character worth cheering for, mirroring the Joel and Ellie relationship from the original game. Just as Ellie softened Joel's hearts in part 1, Yara and Lev softened Abby's heart in part 2. And as we get to learn more about Abby, we slowly realize that her and Ellie are more alike than we could have ever imagined. They both lost father figures to first seemingly random acts of violence. They both gain and subsequently lose important relationships with loved ones due to their selfish choices, and they both embark on violent journeys in an attempt to find a way to satisfy their grief, only to leave pain and suffering in their wake. You see, while Abby was able to successfully finish her hero's journey redemption arc, Ellie actually failed hers. Not only did she succumb to the allure of revenge, losing Dina and costing Jesse his life, she lost her humanity along the way and a sense of self through indulging in self-acts of violence and vengeance. And we see this as well with when she loses her finger in the fight. And this finger symbolizes the last part she had attached to Joel, because Joel had taught her to play the guitar. And now she lost the one final thing she had, leaving her connected to Joel, was her ability to play that guitar. By the end of The Last of Us Part 2, the Ellie that we know and love from the first game is effectively dead and gone alongside Joel. And that being said, we don't believe this is the end of her story, because the consequences of her action have left her fundamentally changed. We truly have to believe that, after finally letting go of her anger for Abby and at long last moving on from her quest for vengeance, Ellie has only just begun her journey of redemption. Now, in conclusion, The Last of Us 2 is a remarkably impressive blockbuster video game that develops characters and places both visually and emotionally to an extent rarely seen in video games. This game is about revenge and how violence begets violence. It's not the most original or revolutionary theme, but it's delivered powerfully and effectively by somehow making every single character on each side of the conflict relatable and sympathetic. No one is entirely evil, and no one is entirely good. Becoming Ellie and then Abby will leave you surprised, frustrated, challenged and hurt, maybe even damaged. It isn't much fun. It's painfully enjoyable, because that's how I like to describe it, but neither are sad movies. And as an observer of this story, it could be easy to look at it as simple, revenge is bad, the riddled cliche. But if we take a closer look, what you'll uncover is an allegory about grief, violence, forgiveness, and the dangers of resentment and confirmation biases. Hanging like a daunting mist over nearly every character and situation is the unbridled grief, corrupts, rots, and ruins everything in its path. For grief is simply love with nowhere to go. This game and its message about the power of understanding grief and redemption have not left my mind since I first played it through on launch week back in 2020. My only hope for part 3 is that when it eventually comes out, is that we'll at least get to see Ellie complete her redemption arc and finally finish her own hero's journey alongside what we managed to see Abby do. Naughty Dog, through pushing the boundaries of interactive storytelling by confronting players with their own anger and bitterness, have created one of the most visceral and emotionally challenging stories of the last generation, one of whose influence and impact will surely be remembered for years to come. And I know it's one I surely won't ever forget. Right, we've come to the end. I hope that was a decent first video essay entry. I do know my reading was a little bit choppy because for the first time, rather than just do a freelance video, I decided to write down my thoughts and words and then sort of, read them out and paragraph them out as notes and stuff. So I will leave the actual transcript in the description. Yeah, I was about to say the notes in the description of the video, because I did write this little essay just discussing The Last of Us 2. But yeah, like I said, these videos will keep coming out every other Monday, if I can keep the streak going. And it'll either just be, you know, commentary video discussing gaming news, or it could be, you know, like another video where I was discussing Red Dead Redemption, and this time where we're discussing The Last of Us Part 2. And yeah, we'll see. If you guys have any topic suggestions of stuff that I could write about, talk about, let me know. And again, I just hope that the audio isn't too bad in this situation, even though I've sort of figured out how to mess with my mic a little bit, so it isn't as bad as it was at the beginning. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks again for stopping. Thanks again for tuning in. Peace out.